Abruptly, the young man comes to in a strange realm, observed by an unfamiliar figure. Disoriented and stunned, his eyes betray sheer bewilderment. He remains hunched, unmoving, a clear sign of his mental disarray. The quiet and peaceful village reveals a different environment from what he was used to. The man beside him wonders where he could start the conversation. First, he asks the boy to listen carefully. Ignoring him, the boy simply begins to remove his clothes, feeling something strange in his body. That world was era filled with swords, magic, and all kinds of monsters and demons. Due to the existence of such creatures, the world turned into a war zone where everyone fights for survival. The greedy place summons various people from other worlds across all dimensions. Moreover, that was the first place reached by the summoned Xenovis, the city of beginning. It was there that he opened his eyes without having learned any magic or martial arts. To the warrior, the boy was a true classless. The protagonist introduces himself as Lee Sunman, while his new companion offers him some food. Hungry, the young man thanks the stranger for his kindness. As they walk, he receives a bit of drink. Quickly, the boy gulls down the canteen, showing gratitude for the help. The young man fills his mouth with the drink, but notices something unusual in the taste. Suddenly, he empties his cheeks, spitting out all the liquid. Summon realized it was goblin paralytic poison and spat it all into the man's eyes. The poison changed taste when diluted in water, but still had a very distinctive fishy smell. Summon understood that the man intended to deceive the newcomer and sell him as a slave. Revealing his powers, the old warrior realized he wasn't a summoned, but behind the fragile appearance hid an experienced soul even without any class. Summon strikes his opponent right in the stomach. While fighting, the young man revealed he had 13 long years of experience. Suddenly, he grabs a dagger with his hands and lunges at his opponent, striking his throat. The main rule of era was not to trust others easily, as that world was nothing but trash. With little money, someone considers his next steps. Despite everything, 100,000 or in a simple dagger were better than nothing. But his body wasn't good enough. His body returned to its original state without muscles or scars. The boy went back 13 years in the past when he was first summoned to era. His gaze reveals the attempt to find the reason for his regression. His name is Lee Sunman, a veteran C-rank mercenary of 27 years old, who had lived an ordinary low-class life. For lacking special talents in his previous life without background or unique skills, he was never able to reach the top. While walking a fine line, he found an unknown dungeon. After much suffering, he found a chest, hoping it contained some valuable treasure. However, there was only a simple stone inside, and he just took the item and left as he didn't know how to use it. Before his death, a message showed that he would return 13 years into the past to the beginning of it all. The stone was some kind of item that returns its bearer to the past, a regression stone. At that moment, he reflects on his situation and opens the status window. He's disappointed to realize that nothing had changed despite all his high expectations. To him, this was a useless regression, as he had the same stats as the first time. Despite everything, he still had the memories of the 13 years he spent in era, recalling great hardships. Walking, he arrives at the Healthy Bone Realignment Clinic and realizes he would have to make some changes. In era, there were all kinds of summoned ones. Mages who use magic, martial artists who use martial arts, and among them, the most common were the classless. Even though they were capable of learning anything, they were the weakest, dying before even learning something in area's wild environment. The summon had lived as a C-rank mercenary, suffering all kinds of humiliation for the past 13 years, but in the end, he died having lived a poor life without any grand achievements. A very old man observes the young boy before him, who desired a skeletal remodeling procedure. Knowing the opportunities he missed, he decides to act differently this time, determined to become much stronger. With this plan in motion, the young man obtains the low-rank martial skeleton and the celestial cultivation technique. Even without skills or resources, Lee notices the transformations in his body as he leaves the establishment. The protagonist secured one of the 3 chances that could improve his pathetic status incentivist already 13 years ago. The martial skeleton caused a bodily modification that made it easier to learn martial arts. He was the first incentivist to undergo that procedure with an acupuncturist who created artificial skeletons. The conditions to receive a skeletal remodeling were to be classless and to have learned 0 skills. The least summon from the past couldn't receive it as he had already learned his skill. But in his new life, it was possible. Knowing that the doctor would die soon, few classless individuals would have that same opportunity. In addition, he also acquired the true celestial cultivation technique, a technique that allows the accumulation of internal energy, the basics of a cultivation technique. The young man knew of the existence of a first-class technique hidden in the small library of Cenis. The owner was unaware of the value of that book, so he managed to acquire it for a bargain. Among the 3 chances he missed in his past life, he managed to grab 2 of them in a single day after being summoned. The 3rd chance would be the prize for the winner of the Colosseum that would open a year from now. His standards weren't very high because only the classless could participate. Thus, it was more than possible to improve his skills during that 1-year incentivist. The next step would be to earn enough money to get accommodation. So, he decided to hunt monsters. Tired, the man paid no attention to the child in front of him. Some men observed the armors and items laid out on the ground. With shining eyes, he stated that he would like to buy some of them. Confused, the vendor asked if the boy had enough money, but the young man would need at least 300,000 to acquire all those objects. Finally, he tried the tactic of putting it on credit, but it didn't work, and he was thrown out. The vendor observed the protagonist's determination. Some offered his clothes as a means of exchange, claiming they were high-quality garments from a highly developed dimension. He tried to convince the man. However, the vendor just let out a loud laugh. Someone didn't like the man's expression and started to get a little irritated. Determined, the vendor stated that he wouldn't sell the items cheaper just because he was classless. To him, that brat had no shame. Saying he didn't need his dirty clothes, he decided to put it on credit. The vendor liked his attitude. Fighting desperately, even though he was just a brat. With foresight, he realized the boy wouldn't die so soon and would become a loyal customer. With his battle gear, the young man gazed at the dark forest. It was a good choice to buy armor, even if he had spent everything he had. He was happy to receive a favor from the vendor, thinking he was lucky in his new life. As he walked, the boy remained on high alert. In the middle of the forest, he thought about his next moves. Being in the hunting grounds made him remember 13 years ago when he was just a defenseless youth without armor and without skill. At that time, he was a completely pathetic person. The system reported various acquisitions such as the lightning step technique, a strong skeleton, and the destruction palm. In the distance, the sun began to set, changing the colors of the sky. Suddenly, something started moving quickly. Within the forest, a goblin tried to hide from the boy, but Lee Summon was already using the soul-chasing sword technique against the monster. With a single strike, the spear pierced the goblin's face with the movement, 1 shot, 1 kill, which the goblin couldn't defend against. After hitting the target, the protagonist tried to rest a little. However, he felt a strong pain in his body. Looking at his hand, he noticed something strange. 1 shot, 1 kill throws the spear using the left hand for support, but his untrained hand could suffer burns. Smiling, he decided he would need to build up some calluses on his hands through training. Even if this was a useless regression, it was still a new beginning. In a dark place, a red smoke could be seen. Sitting on the ground, a mysterious young man used his powers. The magic enveloped his body completely as he sensed something strange in the environment. Under the starry night, Lee Sungmin walks with steady steps toward the illuminated inn, his spear resting on his shoulder and a dimensional bag in hand. The dark wooden building stands out against the sky, with warm windows spilling amber light onto the deserted street. As he enters, the creak of the door announces his arrival. Jack, the innkeeper behind the counter, lifts his face with a broad smile. Sungmin sets the bag down on the wooden surface and pours out its contents. Sharp goblin teeth and vials of luminescent green fluid. Sungmin furrows his brow, uncomfortable with the praise. Jack insists, saying that he is truly impressive, that an ordinary no-class could never achieve the same. Then, excited, he adds that with such talent, Sungmin could reach the level of someone like Xeon. The name strikes Sungmin like a blow. His expression darkens. He abruptly turns his back and climbs the creaking stairs, leaving Jack stunned in the middle of the conversation. In the dark room, lit only by a faint candle, Sungmin sits on the floor in a meditative posture. The status window materializes in shades of purple. His thoughts weigh heavily. Talented is not a word that suits him. In his previous life, he suffered greatly and ended up as a C-rank mercenary. Thanks to Aria's traits, which allow him to memorize martial arts simply by seeing them, he managed to recover them easily. But they are only second-rate techniques. No matter how much he trains, he cannot level up with them. The only true hope is to obtain a first-class cultivation technique. the pure heavenly cultivation technique. Although he has already begun learning it, he knows there is a limit to how far he can progress with basic cultivation alone. He clenches his fist tightly, his knuckles turning white. Fierce determination cuts through his dark gaze. I need stronger martial arts. The next day, the morning sun bathes the inn's hall. Lula, Jack's daughter, blocks Sungmin's path the moment he tries to leave. With a worried and irritated expression, she asks why he insists on hunting in the forest every single day, warning him that he could die at any moment. Sungmin replies calmly, as an otherworlder, he needs to hunt monsters to survive and earn money. Lula retorts, exasperated, saying that even as an otherworlder he could find another kind of job. For example, working at the inn itself. In his previous life, he lived making compromises and knew he could do it again. However, he would not accept living the same way. He promised himself that this time he would achieve what he deserved. For that, he was willing to do anything, wanting to live better than in his past life. As he left for another hunt, the afternoon bell rang invis. That sound signaled the arrival of a new summon. Watching from a distance, he recognized the energy forming. It was a child apparently the same age as Summon. Just like in his case, the child looked vulnerable, an easy target for scammers. Men were already trying to persuade the Summon with the same bottle used on the protagonist. For a moment, he wondered if he should help children, but he preferred not to get involved in those matters. As he turned his back, he bumped into someone standing beside him. Looking up, he saw how huge the man was. Before he could act, he was caught in a trap and accused of breaking a bandit's collarbone. Angry, the giant punched him in the face. The young man fell to the ground, not having time to react to the blow. The commotion drew curious glances from people nearby. Trying to divert the citizens' attention, the attacker claimed the boy had broken his bone. Therefore, you should pay in the same way. Even confused, the townspeople turned their backs on the situation and walked away. Determined, Hyung decided he would break the boy's collarbone in revenge. Furious, someone realized that all those men were part of the same group, and the bandit in front of him was a third-rate martial artist who couldn't tell the difference between a rib and a collarbone. Martial artists can be distinguished by levels of martial arts, and the third was a level reached with minor mastery. Some men had just progressed and hadn't even reached the third category yet. The boy would need help to win that fight, but he knew the people of Cenis were heartless and wouldn't help. Realizing the child would be sold as a slave, he intervened, asking the boy not to drink the poison. The child was confused, but no longer brought the canteen to his mouth. Confident he wanted the help of the boy, who seemed to know some combat techniques appearing to be from Miram. At that moment, the drink was completely spilled on the ground. Standing in front of him, Hyung Nim said the protagonist would be perfect for nobles with strange tastes. Bending his knee, he tried to strike the boy with a blow, but the young man knew he couldn't let things end that way. Determined, he used the lightning step technique to confront his enemy. His second move was the strong exoskeleton steel break skill, which left the opponent confused. With one strike, he hit the attacker's rib. From distance, his companions observed the battle. His destruction palm and other techniques were effective, but the opponent seemed to have an absurdly resistant body. The two paused for a second, regaining their strength. Despite his experience, he was still far from being a match for higher-level martial artists. Hyung did not feel intimidated by the young man's abilities. Considering the protagonist's weight and strength, he wouldn't be able to endure the fight for long. Meanwhile, the other henchman commented that the commotion would attract the guards. Determined, Lee Summon moved in for his next strike. From afar, the child watched the battle attentively. The fight forced him to use his spear as he wouldn't win with his bare hands. Without wasting time, he grabbed his spear with determination. Suddenly, the child was by his side, asking him to repeat a phrase he had said earlier. Confused, the protagonist didn't understand the situation. Asking the child to wait 1 second, he tried to defend himself from the imminent danger. However, the boy stopped the giant's hand with a single touch. Using his powers, he launched Kungam as far as he could. I can't believe those insects of mine challenged you in such a rude way. The bandit fell on top of the pile of wounded bodies on the ground. The palm strike infused with internal energy was not a second or first-class technique. Lee Summon realized that standing beside him was a peak martial artist despite being his age. After the fight, Summon was surprised as the boy might be Wui Hoyan, the little celestial demon. The demon cult has representatives from unorthodox sects who worship power itself. The strongest in the sect becomes the leader and is called the celestial demon, and his son is referred to as the sexy young master. That summoned one was the little celestial demon Hoyan. Coming from an ancient era, he was the same age as Summon, but there was a huge gap between them. At that moment, the protagonist recognized the person who had made a name for himself in Arya. Although he knew who it was, Weiji Hoyan introduced himself to the protagonist. The two talked in the room, and Lee Sum said his name. The boy had shared extremely interesting things, such as the fact that Yura was a completely different world. In that place, there was no demon cult. Laughing at the situation, the boy seemed to be enjoying himself. Deep down, his gaze revealed a certain concern. Remembering the fight in the square, Weiji Hoyan asked what the boy had been yelling at him. Not understanding the reason for the question, he replied that he had warned him not to drink the water containing goblin paralytic poison. However, the little celestial demon did not accept being spoken to so informally by the young man. Lowering his body, he asked for forgiveness, saying he didn't know that he was the young master. Inside, Lee Summon couldn't believe he was bowing to a 13-year-old. Smiling, Weiji Hoyan showed all his satisfaction. Pointing at him, he said the boy had been using martial arts earlier, and he called his techniques trash, saying the way someone fought was ridiculous, and he didn't understand where he had learned that days. The protagonist didn't understand Weiji Huo's words or what his goals were with that conversation. But surprisingly, instead of scorning him, he offered help, saying he would teach him martial arts. Standing in his room, the young man remained silent. Confident, the little demon claimed that with his techniques, he would improve very quickly. However, there was a single condition for Lee Summon. Stunned, the young man feared that condition. The little celestial demon wanted the protagonist to be his friend. Sweating cold, Summon didn't know what to say. Since a very young age, the hair of the demon cult's celestial demon won a friend. His father didn't understand where that desire came from. But little Weiji Hoyan learned from a book that if you have a friend, you can overcome anything. But his father said that only applied to ordinary people, which wasn't his case. The leader of the demon cult, celestial demon Weiji Hack, said his son would rule the myriad demons without a friend. Weiji Hoyan was always surrounded by intense training and rigorous preparation. His father, an authoritarian and inflexible figure, saw any desire for human connection as weakness, something unacceptable. For practical training, those 50 people were annihilated by a 10-year-old child. Being the son of Weiji Hack, those feats were not surprising at all. Even so, his expression did not show much dissatisfaction. Unexpectedly, this desire to have a friend came true when he saw Lee Sungmin, a man returned from time. Born having high expectations, had always been placed upon the boy, who began training early. Deprived of friendships during his childhood due to strict and relentless training, he never had time to meet people. Despite the unusual circumstances, the two made a friendship pact. Weiji Hoyan showed all his happiness upon realizing he had a new friend, Lee Sungmin. Even at nearly 28 years old, the regressor became friends with a 13-year-old child. Hoyan would teach Summon the mystic arts of the Violet Dawn, a special technique of the demon sect that had a unique characteristic. Its internal energy appeared in a violet hue. Confused, the boy thought he was going to learn demon arts from Weiji Hoyan. Now that they were friends, the little celestial demon said the young man could speak to him informally. As he changed his tone of voice, the boy's expression revealed his complete satisfaction. The demon arts could only be practiced by the cult leader in hair, so he would learn the other techniques. While walking through the forest, the young man realized that some time had already passed. Weiji Hoyan himself had taught him the mystic arts of the Violet Dawn for an entire month. Even though he had defeated several monsters at once, his goal was still to become stronger. His current level was between the third and second category, which was progress compared to his previous life. Although his progress was evident, Hoyan's critical gaze never failed to emphasize his flaws, which pushed him even further. In the middle of the forest, the boy thought about collecting the spoils of his victories. Suddenly, a huge creature appeared among the trees. A terrifying monster was ready to end the boy's life. If he hadn't dodged in time, he would already be dead. Looking more closely, he realized it was a terrifying orc. Looking to his right, then to his left, he realized he was completely alone in that forest. He would have to fight that orc on his own. Using his spear, he delivered an attack to the creature's chest. Shortly after, he managed to open a hole in its body. With a jump, he moved in and realized he had won the fight. Confident, he stated that killing that creature was quite easy, but he remembered Hoyan's irritating comparisons. Even so, he began analyzing the strange appearance of the orc, since those monsters didn't usually live in that area. A voice said that despite his young age, He was already a strong warrior. Suddenly, a man approached the boy cautiously. That was Woon Hyeryong, a renowned warrior once known as the orchid-destroying sword in the Central District. Confused, the protagonist didn't understand what the man wanted. Pointing to the fallen beast on the ground, he said he had been in the region searching for an orc causing trouble. In the city, clouds covered the blue sky. The small monkey, Du Sangryong, asked if the boy in front of him wasn't too young. But Moon Hee-ryung said he had seen that warrior fighting with his own eyes, and that he had interesting abilities. Wang Pei, Dagger of the Black Rain, believed Moon's words and introduced himself. Another girl introduced herself as Rainier and said she had come from the Vela's magic school. Curious, she asked if the young man had any idea what kind of job was ahead. Recently in that area, an orc faction had established a new village, invading nearby villages and killing adventurers. As such, the guild offered a reward of 20 million, urged to exterminate the orc village that had been causing trouble in the area. If they succeeded, the reward would be equally divided into 5 parts. Reflecting on the proposal, the young man realized he would earn around 7 million. Although the reward was high, Sungmin was apprehensive about the reliability of his companions. Hiram waited attentively for the young man's response. After thinking for a moment, he accepted the mission. Glad to have the boy on his side, the warrior said that thanks to him, everything would be easier. Despite being grateful for the hospitality, Sungmin had his reservations. Curious, he asked who the 2 seated people were, but they were just pack mules, a couple of nobodies without any class. When they realized the new soldier came from Muram, they bowed. The men were responsible for carrying the bags for the expedition and were paid with leftover money. After receiving some coins from the girl, they went out to buy apples. The group of adventurers approached the orc village. They estimated there were about 50 enemies in the area, but expected to face only 30. Du Sangrian was confident in the orcs' slowness and stupidity, planning to eliminate them quickly to secure the reward. The plan was to divide the group in 2. The young warrior would stay with the experienced swordsman while the rest of the team would organize on another front. The essence of the plan was to lure the orcs out of the village and then divide and conquer. Rainier would spread their scent using wind magic. Since orcs were very territorial, they would hide, waiting for the exact moment to ambush while the mage prepared her attack spell. The little warrior and Wound would light the signal that would attract the rest of the orcs outside. That was the final plan, which seemed quite simple. Sungmin thought that for a small group, it was a reasonable plan, even though he knew it would be better to set a trap. Wanhirion realized they were getting close to orc territory. From that moment on, everyone would have to be very careful and fight properly. The first group headed toward the destination. Tired, the so-called nobody carried all the gear on his back. During the journey of enemy territory, the young man reflected on the difficulty of the mission, especially for classless members. Seeing the man's expression, he remembered himself from his past life. Stopping for a moment, he became curious to know the man's name. The baggage carrier introduced himself as Brass. Skeptical about his ability to protect himself, someone warned him about the imminent dangers once the attack began. That's why he asked Brass to choose between running or staying with the group. He knew the leader wouldn't help at all as he wasn't even paying attention to the conversation. Panting, Brass replied that he couldn't run. He didn't know what kind of punishment he would receive from the guild if he abandoned the mission, so he would have to protect himself. Spotting the village, Wound informed the young warrior that they had arrived. Avoiding patrols along the way, they observed the stakes among the trees. Now would be the perfect moment to light the signal. However, the young man asked to wait a minute and started searching for something inside his dimensional pouch. Confused, the leader didn't understand what the boy was doing. Suddenly, he poured some water so they could rub mud on their bodies, removing some of their scent while rubbing his body with mud. Sman said he learned that trick from his master. Wound Hyang should camouflage his scent, too. Listening to the boy's advice, he threw himself into the mud. Later on, the boy would make more mud so Brass could rub himself as well. In the middle of the forest, the signal flare was activated. The orcs noticed the unusual flame. However, the leader came up with the idea of sending the pack mule as bait. His plan was to send the man to distract the creatures, allowing for an attack from behind. Hearing him talk about him, Brass became desperate. The man definitely didn't want to die, but Wound assured him of his safety during the mission. Despite that, he warned that if he didn't do what he was told, he'd likely end up dead. However, it was nothing more than a mere joke from the leader. Meanwhile, the two awaited the next steps in the dangerous journey. The young warrior took responsibility to go first, demonstrating courage and determination. Understanding the boy's objective, the commander accepted the suggestion. The plant began to work, and 13 orcs were lured out of the village, being eliminated one by one without further problems. In the middle of the forest, the protagonist displayed all his skills with the spear, delivering precise blows and attacks while more creatures came out of the forest. As he fought, someone reflected on why he was doing all this. But regaining his focus, he realized he needed to help the classless comrade. Even without understanding if it was just sympathy, he decided to protect the man from the imminent danger. There was no true friendship between them. They weren't even friends. There was only mutual identification due to the marginal position they both occupied. The creatures waited for the boy's next attack. Reflecting on something he had learned, he attacked with his weapon in hand. Even with his master's harsh words echoing in his mind, the warrior stayed firm in his mission. His thoughts took him back to when Weiji Hoyin taught him his techniques. His master taught him the only proper way to wield a spear. The young man mentally repeated the lesson about stabbing from a distance. With determination, he executed the soul-chasing spear technique, the third form called lightning split strike. With that, he defeated a large number of orcs that had been lured out. Alongside him, Wu Hian fought relentlessly against those monsters. On the other side, a massive creature threatened to end Brass's life. Not knowing how to defend himself, the man simply awaited his end. Suddenly, the young man stabbed the orc with his spear, saving his comrade. With a smile on his face, he was grateful to have saved the classless man. The scene was one of war with countless orcs dead on the ground. The leader cut off the orcs' ears while counting the total number of creatures that had been defeated. The ears would be used as proof of the hunt, assuming the other group had taken care of the rest. Throwing his sack to the pack mule, Woon ordered the classless man to collect everything. Now they were to rejoin the rest of the group. With an expression of admiration on his face, Brass thanked Summon for the help. Entering the forest, he went to fetch the luggage. The protagonist observed that gratitude poured onto his back. Meanwhile, the group eagerly awaited the arrival of the three. Despite the mud covering their bodies, the humor and relief were visible. The first part of the plan had worked. The leader said that thanks to the little warrior, they had managed to finish everything earlier. But the real problems were only just beginning. Suddenly, something was thrown toward the group. A dagger hit Renner precisely in the chest. Confused, the girl didn't understand what had just happened. The mage was using her powers to attack her friends. Noticing the danger, the warriors grabbed their weapons, ready for a new fight. The young man used his spear to prevent the enemy from advancing. Suddenly, he had a memory from his past life. Carrying a huge sack, the boy approached to receive a few coins. Looking to the side, he saw many people gathered in one place. It was an execution, but it wasn't something the boy was familiar with. The accused was a truly bold person, a mercenary from Muram. He had gone on a mission and killed all of his companions to keep the reward, but ended up getting caught. Attentively, young Sun Moon observed the man's head stuck on a piece of wood. Returning to the present situation, the accused was the man standing before him. Surprised by the protagonist's reaction time, Woon Hee Ryung praised his quickness. However, the boy already knew everything, having witnessed his execution in another life. Even though it happened 13 years ago, he still remembered the first execution he had seen. The leader said the boy's skills were impressive for his age after watching how he fought the orcs. The second category martial artist challenged the young warrior, saying he was still weaker than him. Even knowing it would be a tough battle, Summon wouldn't give up easily. Despite the level difference, the boy showed superior skill and movement reading. He anticipated the attacks and used the reach of his spear with precision. Observing the flow of his movements, he managed to strike the opponent. With his past experience and Hoyan's training, he would be a worthy adversary. Woo Hee Ryung was impressed by the boy's abilities when seen up close. Even so, he knew the protagonist wouldn't last much longer in the battle. But there was a trap because the boy had poisoned the leader. By mixing a bit of poison into the mud where he lay, he knew that without being injected directly, it would be lethal. That poison was enough to compromise his strength and stability. Now, Woo Hee Ryung was at a disadvantage and would need to think of a new plan. Quickly, he threw himself to the side. Lee Sung-min realized that the man had made a risky move. As his hands trembled, the enemy tried to exploit the weakness by taking the carrier hostage. The commander declared he would kill the man with a single blow. Worried, The boy didn't know how to escape that situation, but Moon Hee Ryung was sure that Man was a weak point for the boy, who had grown sympathetic toward him. Standing still, the boy still couldn't move. Even nervous, the warrior did not retreat. Definitely, using the carrier as a hostage would not be a good tactic. For all those years, he had worked as a mercenary and only helped Brass because he remembered his own past. His gaze revealed all of his fury and rage. On the other side, Woon felt the poison spreading through his body. Internally, he battled his emotions, physical exhaustion, and moral dilemma, but he needed to stay grounded in reality. He knew he couldn't win in that state and had to conserve energy in case the monkey died. If he missed, he'd be giving himself to the enemy. If he waited too long, Brass the carrier would die. But, against all expectations, Brass intervened in the situation. With a strike, he managed to buckle the leader's knees, trying to make him lose balance. The boy noticed the courage of the classless man, who was trying to do the impossible. Holding Woon Hiram's body, he used all of his weight in his favor. However, the opponent managed to stab him with a knife. As he screamed, the look of satisfaction on the man's face was evident. Shortly after, the young man was already by his side. The enemy panicked and tried to beg for his life, but was quickly killed. On the other side, the monkey had defeated the mage Wang Pai after a hard battle. The threat had been neutralized, but the cost was high. Brass was dead. Lee Sunmin remained standing over the two, his spear piercing the enemy's body. After the deaths of Woon Hee Ryung and Wang Pei, they were taken to the mercenary guild to receive 35 million. WJH was happy to see that the warrior had returned safely. Curious, he wanted to know the reason for the delay, since he was quite late. Tired, the protagonist threw himself onto his bed, hoping to rest a little. The death of Brass, however, weighed heavily on his spirit, as with a little more energy, he could have saved the boy. Back in his shelter, he reflected on his actions, feeling dirty, tainted by decisions he didn't want to make again. Wiji Hoyon confronted him, asking if he had killed someone. His friend claimed he could smell human blood on his body. Lee Sungmin began to talk about this second-rate martial artist who was trying to kill him, forcing him to fight back. Even so, the little demon still felt that his companion was hiding something. What truly haunted him was the unspoken question. What, exactly, was he hiding? Hearing those words, the boy stood up. Not even he knew what he was hiding, realizing his friend's distrust. Curious, he asked if it was strange that someone like him had defeated a second-rate martial artist, but Weiji deflected. Looking into his eyes, he knew this was a special person. Weiji Hoyin was strolling through the city, trying to understand more about that world. Along the way, he saw many things and ended up learning about the situation of the classless. The vast majority of them were miserable people who didn't even have decent food. It was understandable that humans would kill insects while needing to build the resolve to kill a small animal. Amid the intense routine of training and challenges, Hoyin carefully observed the boy's behavior beside him. However, on the first day he was summoned, Sungmin went straight into the forest to hunt monsters. To him, his survival depended on it, but maybe the other classless didn't do that, because they weren't capable. Otherwise, they knew it but were unable to put their lives on the line to kill another living being. His friend was confused as to how he managed to do all that in one day despite being a 14-year-old classless boy. After hearing that the boy had adapted quickly, he moved on to his second suspicion. Weiji Hoyin stated that the boy had no talent. If he taught 10 things, he'd be able to learn about 3 or 4. Even so, in just 2 months, his spear skills had surpassed the level of common beginners. He did make typical rookie mistakes, and his mastery of internal techniques was too refined for someone with so little experience. That's why, to him, it was very strange that someone with no talent could learn a martial art in just 2 months. Hoyin's intuition, shaped by years of experience, insisted there was something more behind that serene face. The protagonist didn't understand that kind of conversation. Faced with all this, Hoyin made a risky decision by stating he didn't like lies. Inside the room, the two remained silent. They summed and stated that everyone had secrets they wanted to keep to themselves. Therefore, trying to uncover them wasn't an appropriate attitude for a friend. In front of him, the child didn't know how to respond. He only said that he also had a secret, like everyone else. Trying to exchange secrets, he said he would tell his to Sungmin, but he wasn't interested. Even so, he tried to persuade his friend with the top martial technique. But being someone without talent and with so little internal energy, he knew he would be unable to use it. Intrigued, the child no longer knew how to convince his companion. Finally, he said he would give 20% of his internal energy. That statement left the protagonist completely shocked. Deep down, that child was just curious to understand what his secret was. Being his only friend, he wanted to know everything about him. Looking into his eyes, he said that this was the definition of friendship for him. Sitting on the bed, Sungmin asked Hoyeon to make a promise. If he told his secret, the child couldn't kill him. But Weiji wouldn't be capable of killing his friend. Letting her hair down, she said that, in fact, she was a girl. The protagonist was shocked by that revelation, showing it was something quite unexpected. She said her father wanted to keep it a secret from the sect, having to live as a boy to follow her path. The revelation was so great that the protagonist remained silent. When summoned to that world, she kept the disguise because she had lived that way for so long. That was the truth she hid from everyone, but now she trusted him with the secret. Coming to terms with his thoughts, Sungmin said they would need separate rooms from now on. With the air still heavy with revelations, the protagonist felt he also needed to be honest. Gathering a bit of courage, he decided it was time to tell his secret. The young man took a deep breath before saying he was a regressor. Weiji's eyes widened at that information, but the girl didn't believe in that nonsense, not even knowing what it meant. He was a regressor, had died, gone back in time, and now carried with him the knowledge and memories of a previous life. Now his abilities made a lot of sense, even if it was hard to believe. Since that world was so different, anything was possible. Curious, the girl asked why she would have any reason to kill him after hearing that. Although he was trapped in the body of a 14-year-old boy, his mind belonged to someone who was 27. Despite everything, he felt bad for lying about his age, his identity, his story. But to Hoyeon, that didn't matter at all. She was the one who chose to get close, the one who told him to learn martial arts, and the one who decided to offer friendship. None of it had been a deception, since he merely agreed with what she herself wanted. Therefore, she had no reason to kill her friend or end their friendship. During the 2 months they spent together, she had seen him as a friend, and that wouldn't change because of a revealed secret. In the end, that was the meaning of friendship for her. Emotion took over her shocked face as she sincerely thanked him for the connection. Their bond had become something real, solid, built on trust and mutual respect. Lightheartedly, she teased some men about the fact that even with an extra life, his current level was still low. Besides, the girl had countless questions to ask, but they would leave that for later. From now on, she was ready to transfer her internal energy to him. Shocked, the protagonist didn't expect that promise to be real. Internal energy was something accumulated inside the bodies of martial artists. It was with it that they performed superhuman feats. There were no shortcuts. Only with cultivation techniques could one increase this energy. That's why many dedicated their entire lives to sharpening and strengthening this inner force. When Hoyeon began to transfer part of her internal energy, she noticed his blood vessels weren't clean. In fact, they were filled with a lot of accumulated impurities. Even so, she would start the transfer confident that he could at least absorb part of the power. He would have to use the Violet Dawn arts to try to retain about 20%. Placing the palm of her hand on the boy's back, she began the transfer while he resisted bravely. Looking at his body, he felt the energy flowing inside him. Even tired after the process, Hoyeon only smiled and was curious to know her friend's first impressions. The strength, heat, and pressure of the internal energy flowing through his meridians made his body vibrate. That 20% of internal energy was more than he had accumulated in his past life. He'd retained half of the energy in his body, transforming his entire physique. The rest of the energy would enter through the meridians. He continued to cultivate the Violet Dawn arts. That power would become a true part of him. Collapsing onto the bed, Hoyeon needed to rest a little after the procedure beside her. The boy reflected, trying to understand her motivations. Curious, he asked why Hoyeon so much for him with a smile on her face. The girl said it was because he was her friend. Everything she did for someone was out of friendship, by her own choice, for her own satisfaction, not out of obligation. While she rested, she reflected on her own satisfaction. Hoyeon also decided to teach one more martial art, the supreme spear technique of the 9 heavens, used by the Spear King. Although she knew Sungmin's limitations, she was willing to give her all so that he could master it. Besides, she always emphasized that her actions were for her own satisfaction. After all, he was the first friend she had in 13 years, and she didn't want to see him die in vain as he had in the past life. The protagonist was touched by the girl's sensitivity. Suddenly, she held his face, stating that he shouldn't bow his head to his friends. Touching his bruised face, she couldn't believe he had taken a punch. Suddenly, she grabbed him and pulled him closer to her body. With a smile on her face, she said she wanted something more fun. As they exchanged confidences about the past, the bond between them grew stronger. She was curious to know what she was like in the past life. However, the boy said he only heard rumors that claimed she ruled with tremendous power at the peak of area. After being summoned, she left the city in less than a month. And after that, she remained missing for a long 3 years. Reflecting on that life, she imagined she must have traveled a lot during those 3 years. She had always wanted freedom, and being in the cult meant she only had freedoms within the leader's operations. That's why she was so happy to have been summoned to that world and for having made a friend. Finally, she revealed that she wished to leave that place in a month. Dreamy, she wanted to feel the world and all its freedom. After teaching him the supreme technique, he would set off on a journey like in the past life. Now, she wanted to know what Sungmin's plans were. She was curious to know how her friend wanted to live that life. Hearing those questions, not even he knew how to answer properly. Remembering his past life and everything he had suffered, he didn't want any of it to repeat. Compared to his previous life, he simply wished to have a better one. To the girl, that was a very ambiguous thing to say. Determined, she wanted to find out what Lee Sungmin's goal was. Resting his head on the bed, he said he wasn't sure about anything, but she would be eager to hear his goal when he eventually found one. In addition, she wanted to know about his past life in the smallest details. Embarrassed, the protagonist said he didn't have much to tell. Reflecting on that, Sungmin also realized that in his previous life he had never had someone he could call a friend. Hoyan was his first friend in all his lives. The night passed, and they talked about many things. Then a month passed quickly, without them noticing. Before her departure, the girl wanted to test how much Sungmin had learned in a month. It was the final training session before goodbye, and he needed to show everything he had learned. It was the moment to prove his worth, with every drop of effort and every trace of the newly acquired energy. Hoyan, on the other hand, kept that confident smile, knowing he wouldn't be able to defeat her easily. Sungmin was ready, with his eyes burning with determination and his spear in hand. As always, she proposed something unexpected, giving him an advantage of 20 strikes. Even so, the young man was extremely suspicious of the gift. Some had hesitated as he thought about which move he used, but remembered the supreme spear of the 9 heavens adapted for him. Hoyan had named it after him, making it more than a technique, a symbol. Even if it wasn't his intention, that was a recognition, a way of saying he was unique. The technique represented a fusion between the supreme spear of the 9 heavens and the devastating soul-chasing spear. Now, with personalized movements and postures designed for Sungmin, you would begin the fight. Wielding his spear, he tried to use the learned technique, followed by the soul-chasing strike. Patiently, the girl waited on the other side. With just a light touch, she was able to dodge the attack. He advanced with precision, more strength, more technique, more control. His second stance was the lightning-splitting pursuit. Compared to his previous version, that boy who barely knew how to handle a spear was now someone else with more control in his attacks. He had learned about force, which spun and swung the opponent's attack, control to pressure and block the opponent's strike. In addition, subtle attacks were essential to pierce the opponent. That was the basic for his spearmen, but the boy had learned it all on his own. Therefore, he would need to practice those movements every day until he could master them. In the fight with Hoyan, he was able to show everything he had just learned. Even with all his evolution, he still wasn't able to use his back. Frustrated, the boy tried to mix each spear strike with explosive energy, following her tips. Weiji Hoyan was pleased to notice that he had listened to her advice. Tired, he realized there was a vast gap between the two. Even advancing to the second category, thanks to Hoyan's internal energy, she was able to block with just her right hand. In front of him was a peak martial artist, confident she didn't show the slightest bit of fatigue as she ate. Meanwhile, her opponent couldn't do anything. Not giving up the fight, he attacked again with his spear, but quickly the girl blocked all his strikes, one after another. Each blow was stopped with ease by her right hand, and then, one by one, the 19 attacks were delivered. And with none landing, he realized he had lost. However, the child didn't expect the final strike, which brought the spear's tip very close to her face. With a smile on his face, the young man thought he had achieved his goal. But quickly, the girl vanished from his sight. Without understanding anything, she appeared behind him, showing he had lost the fight. Even so, Hoyan praised him, recognizing the potential in her friend. With the internal energy he now carried, Sungmin was born for martial arts. And even without realizing it, he had sensed her presence before, something reserved for those with talent. She believed in him so much that she said one day his weapon would become something exceptional. The girl was looking 10 years into the future, prophesying what could happen. That fight had been extremely easy. Even so, she was satisfied with her friend's skills for showing much more than what she had taught. Therefore, they would meet again in 10 years. A month ago, she asked what Sungmin's goal in life was, but he still wasn't sure. In that case, he should make her his final goal. Humans need goals, and his life would be nothing more than drifting aimlessly. As a challenge, she wanted him to come back in 10 years, strong enough to defeat her. But Sungmin hesitated, saying he would never be able to become like her. He couldn't do it because he had no talent, unlike his friend, who was a genius and had taken several elixirs. The two of it started from different lines, making comparison impossible. He was being swallowed by that old sense of inferiority from his past life. Hoyan didn't hide her frustration, stating that she hated that inferiority complex from his past life was not a good thing. Suddenly, fury was written in the protagonist's eyes. He had nothing, and was summoned to area with empty hands and no talent. He had risked his life fighting a boar in the mud, living a lowly life until the day of his death. Hoyan pointed out that he had learned mystical arts and become a second-rate warrior in just 3 months. Even after receiving his second chance, he refused to aim high, to have a goal, not allowing himself to dream. In every way, she tried to make her friend open his eyes, but he only got angrier. Hoyan was shocked to realize how angry he was. The protagonist couldn't believe he was getting a lecture from a 7-year-old child. Then, even reluctantly, some men accepted the challenge, making her his goal, piercing her heart with a spear. Frightened, Hoyan declared that wasn't what she wanted, because she didn't want to die. To her, friends didn't kill each other. After the euphoria passed, someone agreed with the girl. Suddenly, his expression turned into pure shyness, but the girl teased him again, leaving him completely irritated. In the end, they sealed the deal, and 10 years from now, they would meet again. With a smile on her face, the child said she would be looking forward to his spear. Pausing to think about that phrase, the young man found her words strange. Despite her young age, the girl teased him with her jokes. The two had a large age gap, but she only played with the situation. Getting closer, the girl began to intimidate the warrior. Determined, she stated that in 10 years she would be so grown up he would have nothing to comment on. Summoned to find 3 goals, survive, seize every opportunity his memories could offer. Resting on her shoulder, the child said goodbye sincerely. Sungmin said the two of them would meet again in 10 years, eagerly awaiting that day. In addition, his last goal, but the most important of all, would be to not die until that day arrived. As a promise, he told Hoyan that he would stay alive, because now he had something and someone to live for. The friends went down different paths, separating for a while. In Xenovis, Lee Sungmin was able to achieve 3 important things: the martial skeleton, the true celestial cultivation technique, and finally in the third, the tournament of the classless. In the tournament of the classless, only those who have no class are allowed to participate. 10 months after Hoyan's departure, Xenovis held another edition of the tournament. During that time, Lee Sungmin's martial arts had become first grade, making it easy to win the tournament. As a prize, he received a sacred energy elixir capable of enhancing internal energy. He drank the elixir on the spot without hesitation. However, compared to the energy he had received from Hoyan, that elixir didn't feel valuable. With that, Lee Sungmin felt he had achieved everything he could in Xenovis. What remained now was to depart, and on the way, he ran into Hans, a street vendor. The man congratulated him on his victory and asked what he wanted to buy, but that, in truth, was a farewell since the boy was leaving. Understanding the situation, Hans smiled with a mix of pride and sadness. Some men had become someone special, having known the classless boy from the beginning. The man was certain the protagonist would do well outside that city and survive for a long time. Before leaving, he handed him something. It was a second-hand dimensional bag with 50% more capacity than the one he had. Confused, Sungmin didn't understand why the vendor was giving him something so valuable. Hans simply replied that when someone gives a gift, it's better to accept, and besides, the bag wouldn't be worth much for Rizal. That was a farewell gift, and when the young man became famous, he could repay it 100 times over. He wanted Sungmin to spread across area that at the start of his journey, he owed a lot to a simple street vendor. With gratitude in his eyes, Sungmin thanked him for the kind gesture. Before leaving, he returned to the inn where he had been staying. He was surprised by Lula, the innkeeper's daughter who worked at the place. Quickly, she noticed that the boy was leaving. It wasn't too hard to guess, since he had left the room way too tidy. Talking to the boy, She said her job as an employee was to tidy the rooms. The protagonist realized how grateful he was for all the time he had spent at the inn. The girl knew that everyone summoned to the city ended up leaving one day, and she was already used to it. When he said he had to leave, her expression showed a bit of sadness. She didn't want to believe someone was leaving so suddenly. Before he could go, she wished that he would die a horrible death in some random place. Angry, she left stomping her feet on the ground. Jack, the innkeeper, and her father noticed his daughter's fury. The two men were left confused as realizing how unpredictable women could be. Jack apologized for his daughter, saying she was still very young. But the protagonist wasn't shaken by the situation, as he had a lot of maturity within himself. The man gave him an old cloak, one he had used when he was young. The cloak contained temperature retention magic and sword magic, making it very useful despite its simple appearance. Sungmin thanked him once again, and Jack advised him to get the cloak adjusted, as it was too big. He concluded by saying Sungmin had been the best classless person to ever stay at the inn. Emotional and with tears in his eyes, he asked the boy to be careful out there. Wearing the cloak, the boy left the inn. However, he stopped walking for a moment when he heard noises coming his way. At the moment of departure, Lulo was shouting Sungmin's name and running toward him. Turning around, he saw the girl standing behind him. Tired, she had run to him and was breathless to say what she wanted. As she rested a bit, she caught her breath. Lowering her head, she said she took back what she had said earlier when she wished he would die. Sweat ran down her face as she wished for him to live a long life and not die. Impressed, Sutman couldn't believe the girl had run all that way just to say that. From the bottom of her heart, Lula wished for him to live a long life, and when he grew tired, to return to that city. Thanking her for the words, he smiled at the girl, admiring her kindness. Before he left, she confessed that at some point, she started looking at him differently. She didn't know exactly why, nor did she understand the feeling, but she believed she had started to like him. After confessing that, the two remained silent until Summon said he had already figured that out. Worried, Lula didn't want him to die, and he asked her to be at ease. And so the two said their goodbyes. Realizing they would be apart, the girl broke down in tears. In his past life, Sungmin had taken 3 years to graduate from Xenovis, and in this life, it took only 1 year. If before he had no good memories of that place, this time he left carrying precious ones. Looking back, he wondered if he would be able to return to Area, and with those memories, he departed, carrying with him the one promise to never die. Lee Sungmin reached Mount Mercy as a very young practitioner. His next step would be to choose a type of prohibition, and to avoid dying it was something he had to do. In his memory, Hoyin had asked where they would meet again, admitting she didn't know the geography of that world very well. Thinking of a place, the hero decided they would meet in Behenger. There were still 9 years left until the promised day, but the question now was different. Where should he go? He didn't mean to rush straight to Behenger, considering returning to being a mercenary, but that would mean living the same life. This time, he wanted to do things differently. He needed time to train, to truly grow. The Mountain of Mercy, the god of trials and tribulations of Area, came to his mind. It was said that in that god's territory, it was possible to increase training efficiency hundreds of times. Besides, he was sure that Mount Mercy was nearby. Decided he chose what his next step would be. Upon finding the mountain, he immediately began training under the prohibitions imposed by a priest. He received 2 of them. The first was the prohibition of weight. Everything became heavier, his body, his clothes, even the objects in his dimensional bag. Even the bread felt like lead. The second prohibition was even crueler. Upon tasting the bread, the boy immediately became ill. Suddenly, the taste of food was something different, totally disgusting, making him vomit. That was the second prohibition he received, which affected his sense of taste. In truth, you don't lose your sense of taste, but everything that enters your mouth tastes disgusting. Not just the taste, but also the texture of the food. He could even feel the body fluids of a squirming insect. At that moment, he was weak upon realizing that he wouldn't be able to eat or drink anything. Reflecting, the protagonist thought about giving up, believing he didn't need that mission. If he went straight to Behenger and became a mercenary, he'd probably reach rank B quickly. That would already be better than his past life, however. He still thought a lot about Weiji Hoyin. Remembering the girl, he tried to force himself to eat the piece of bread. He tasted all the worst flavors in his mouth, but he didn't give up halfway. Even while cursing Mercy for that terrible prohibition, he decided he would try. Beside him, the goddess whispered in his ear, considering him an insolent human. Suddenly, the warrior sensed the energy circulating through his body. Turning around, he couldn't see anyone, thinking it might be an illusion. A week passed, and during all that time, the weather became increasingly merciless. Still, he could try to hunt and spotted a deer ahead of him. Grabbing his ring, he hid and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, he sprang from hiding and launched himself at the animal. However, as he got closer, the creature turned out to be so cute that he couldn't bring himself to kill it. Frozen, he was unable to act. Thus, the deer hopped away, grateful for being spared. Lee Sung-min's journey was becoming more and more difficult. The protagonist didn't know how much longer he could endure the mountain. Tired, he set his spear down and reflected on his current life. Without enough nutrients, his only food was bread and water. On that mountain, he had to fend for himself, finding clothes, food, and shelter while bearing the prohibitions. In addition to the extreme temperature changes, the orbs were strong and fast as well. The weight prohibition kept him from hunting, and even if he managed to, the taste prohibition kept him from eating. With his body weakened, he intended to train there for at least 2 years, but was already reaching his limit in the first week. While he reflected, he noticed an unusual presence approaching. Then something unexpected happened. A woman appeared before him. Not recognizing that face, he wanted to know who she was. On that mountain, there was a prohibition that prevented practitioners from hurting one another, so perhaps he wasn't in danger. However, the woman had a prohibition that kept her from speaking. She could only communicate using gestures. Sung-min quickly realized that the woman carried the voice prohibition. Suddenly, the same deer he had seen before appeared dead before him. Using a stick, the woman began to write something on the ground in Arya's official language. She had been watching him for days and knew that, at this rate, he would soon die, so she had come to help him. Despite his gratitude for the help, some men were suspicious, wanting to know what she wanted in return. But the woman didn't expect any kind of repayment for the gesture, showing she was simply a kind person. That woman who had appeared out of nowhere helped him completely. She had introduced herself as a kind person, and every time he was in trouble, she appeared again. One day, he wanted to know her name and was surprised by her answer. He was shocked to learn that it was Baek Sogo, a legendary figure he knew from his past life. She was known as Baek Sogo the Lightning, famous for her exceptional mobility, fast as lightning itself. But what truly shocked him wasn't meeting a future celebrity. He knew that in the future, 8 years from now, she would be murdered. Killed by Weiji Hoyan, the little celestial demon. On Mount Mercy, practitioners received severe prohibitions every 6 months and couldn't harm one another. Some men tried to understand the mystery behind Baek Sogo's death, wondering if it had been an incident inside a dungeon. Beside him, the woman observed his thoughts carefully. Suddenly, a boy was startled by the woman's appearance, as she used her fingers to write something directly on the stone. She was observing his condition and showed concern, thinking he might be starving again. Even with her high level in martial arts, her prohibition also prevented her from using sound transmission to communicate. Confused, the boy noticed something different in her body. That was her new prohibition after a 1.5 years on the mountain. It prevented her from feeling her left arm. Just like him, who had lost his sense of taste and bore intense weight on his body, she too faced limitations. Baek Sogo felt sorry for the boy's hardships, especially that he had lost the joy of eating. Curious, he asked about the prohibitions of other practitioners. Then she decided to introduce him to the other mountain dwellers who had been training there for over half a year. Without time to think, Baek Sogo vanished like lightning. Startled, the protagonist wondered how he'd ever be able to keep up with the woman's speed. Even without the weight prohibition, he wouldn't be able to go as fast as her. With his body heavy, he should focus more on movement techniques. Intrigued, the young man tried to ask Baek Sogo to teach him some techniques, but it wouldn't be possible. With a smile on his face, he said it was just a joke. With her right arm, the woman held the boy's body and carried him. Because he was too slow, she would have to carry him on her back. Nervously, he asked the woman to wait 1 second so he could process everything, but she didn't listen to his requests and began to run. Baek Sogo, the mute, took some men to meet the other practitioners, but upon arrival, they smelled a terrible odor. Scarlet, a future grand mage, had prohibitions that kept her from bathing or changing clothes. Dokbi Jun, the future phantom sword, had lost vision in both eyes. Baek Sogo had restrictions in her left eye, left arm, and was deprived of speech. Lee Sung-min quickly realized he was surrounded by individuals he knew very well. In the future, they would become powerful figures in area respected by all. However, at that moment, they were still complete unknowns. Scarlet asked what the boy's prohibitions were. She expressed doubt and judgment about him starting with 2 prohibitions, questioning how long he could endure. For entering Mount Mercy in search of power, Dokbi Jun believed that those 2 prohibitions were understandable. The old man said the young man wanted to surpass his limits, no matter the cost. Impressed, the boy agreed with everything said, even if it gave the other practitioners chills. Dokbi Jun explained that all kinds of random people gathered on the mountain, and only 4 remained in the past 6 months. Saying he was eager to see the boy's next steps, the old man would keep an eye on him. Besides the protagonist, Baeksogo had also started with 2 prohibitions. Now that everyone knew each other, they could return. But the woman had said there were 4 people who had trained for more than a year and a half. Among them, a 5th figure was mentioned, someone named Flam, whose name inspired caution. Dokbi Jun said that Flam was a very dangerous person who shouldn't be introduced to the protagonist. Confused, he didn't understand all that fear of the last practitioner, but let the story go. Time passed, and 4 intense months of training made him stronger. The prohibitions became more severe, increasing the weight on his body and making food unbearable. Even so, his progress was remarkable, growing stronger each day. After 4 months of training, his mastery of the Violet Dawn mystic art rose to 3 stars. In addition, his strikes became much more precise and powerful. Mount Marshi was harsh and challenging. Despite everything, the trials were rewarding. During the day, he used the supreme ring of the 9 heavens, Sungmin style, and at night, he practiced the Violet Dawn mystic art. He accepted this suffering as part of the path he had chosen, feeling like his bones would break at every moment. The protagonist was destined for that fate, for it was the goal he had chosen. His body grew and changed. His clothes no longer fit too tight to contain the new strength emerging within him. Then he met a new face, someone his age, watching him with curiosity. The young man was impressed by the interesting spear-throwing technique he had just witnessed. Standing on a rock, the newcomer said he had never seen someone his age on the mountain. The boy introduced himself as Flam, the very name that had been mentioned with fear. Curious, he wanted to know the name of the stranger who had such enviable skill. Scarlet was sitting, practicing one of her spells, reflecting on geniuses. Dokbi explained that Flam surpassed others while laughing at them. That was his kind of talent. Thus, the advice the protagonist had received was to not meet the boy, or he would end up falling into a bottomless pit of despair. At that moment, the young man remembered the wise words of the old man. Nervously, he introduced himself as Lee Sungmin. With a smile on his face, Flam realized the boy had already heard his name from others. Turning his back, he said he needed to train with his spear and didn't have time for conversation. The protagonist couldn't believe that small child was a true genius. Walking away, he didn't want to waste his time on a guy like that. But the boy didn't seem to want to leave him alone, asking countless questions while following him. Saying he would train with his spear, Lee Sungmin realized the weapon had disappeared from his hands. Looking back, Flam was holding his battle weapon as a form of provocation. The smile on the boy's face was frightening and strange. The greatest humiliation possible for a martial artist is to have their weapon taken. But before getting angry, Sungmin was lost in confusion. Flam claimed he would return the object after using it a little, borrowing it temporarily. Suddenly, the boy began to imitate his techniques and movements. Using the supreme balance of the 9 heavens Sungmin style, he attempted a new strike. All of a sudden, he perfectly remembered the technique used by the protagonist to cut down a tree. Wielding his spear, he unleashed thundering blows in the middle of the forest. With a fluid movement, he copied exactly the technique Sungmin had created and refined over months. Realizing the destruction caused, he admitted it was a very good spear technique. Lee Sungmin looked very frightened when he realized the boy had been able to use a spear technique he had seen only once. With a smile on his face, Flam watched his companion's reaction. With a burst of laughter, he realized he was better than Lee Sungmin. At that moment, the protagonist became hopelessly embarrassed. Flam didn't understand why so many people came to the mountain to train hard, since he could easily surpass them all. Even so, none of those people were like him. Confused, the protagonist paid attention to every word the boy said. Calling Baeksogo, Scarlet, and Dokbi Jun weird, he claimed he could copy all the practitioners' techniques. Even so, not even Flam knew why he was that way. While others seemed talented in Sungmin's eyes, Flam shone like a sun that outshone all the stars. In that way, how could the protagonist ever hope to reach geniuses if he was just an ordinary person? He felt different from the time he had spent with Hoyan, even though she never flaunted her genius. With a superior air trying to appear as a normal person, Flan wanted to know what Sungmin's prohibition was. He revealed that he had 4 and mocked a prohibition based on humility, causing Sungmin to back away. Flan tried to return the spear, but was immediately rejected. Sungmin no longer wanted contact with him, consumed by anger, shame, and helplessness. Not understanding the hostility, he suggested Sutman descend the mountain as he was too weak for that place. Upon hearing that, the protagonist tried to punch the boy hard, but was stopped. Within the mountain, none of the practitioners were allowed to hurt each other as it was strictly forbidden. When confronted physically, Flam mocked the situation. Flam claimed that some men only attacked because he knew no one could be hurt on the mountain, due to the rules of the goddess Mercy. Baeksogo appeared, silently watching everything with attention. Flam justified himself, saying he had only borrowed the spear, and that Sungmin had overreacted. He'd also claimed that although the spear technique was excellent, the Kira wasn't good enough to master it. The more powerful the martial art, the harder it was to refine, so he stated that Sungmin would have to train a lot. Mountain, the greater the prohibition, the greater the blessings granted by Mercy. Therefore, the boy explained that pushing oneself to the limit was the only way to evolve faster. Suddenly, he was prevented from speaking due to his prohibition. Behind him, Baeksogo seemed genuinely impressed by his audacity. However, it was already too late, and the protagonist had already understood his next step. Overcome with intense emotions, Sungmin ran toward the temple. Meanwhile, Baeksogo tried with all her might to use her voice to call out to the boy. But her prohibition prevented her, making her unable to speak. The echo of the word talent resonated in her mind like a hammer crushing her self-esteem. Meanwhile, the young man cried out desperately for the name of the goddess Mercy. A growing sense of inferiority spread, and his frustration turned into despair. Upon hearing his name, Mercy appeared, ready to speak with that human. Holding his spear, his body was full of determination, as he said he wanted to add another prohibition. Lee Sungmin was in an unknown space, enveloped by a divine aura. Before him, the entity he had called manifested, Mercy, the goddess of prohibitions. That space belonged to her. It was her home. Curious, the protagonist wanted to be sure he was speaking with Mercy, but it was indeed the goddess who appeared when the boy called her. With curiosity, she asked if the young man wanted to add another prohibition. He already had the prohibitions of taste and weight, which were already very difficult. Despite everything, he was determined to endure another one. Mercy had doubts about the motivations of the human in front of her. His soul was marked by returning through time by being a regressor. The eyes of a god can see through a mortal's causality. All mortals are destined to die the moment they are born, and going against this is the essence of causality. Those who defy the law and break the limits of their own destiny are called transcendental beings. Although the boy was not a transcendental being, he distorted the limits of causality, and even after dying, returned to the past. All existences are bound by the law of cause and effect. It was not natural to have defied death, as his soul would suffer tremendous karma in the process. Even so, nothing would affect him while he was alive, but after death, he would suffer for millions of hours. That was the true meaning of going against the law, but it didn't seem to concern the protagonist, who appeared indifferent to death. In front of him, Baeksogo looked extremely irritated by the young man's actions. She realized that he had added a new prohibition, even with 2 other terrible ones. As he trembled, he noticed how he had made the woman worried. His expression revealed a certain astonishment upon hearing the young man's words. Curious, she asked what kind of prohibition had been added. Now he would have to endure the prohibition of heat and dreams. Prohibitions of senses and abstract concepts were even more severe. The first deprived him of any warmth. Cold took over his body, even under the sun or before a fire. The second turned sleep into a land of nightmares, where the most painful memories repeated without respite. His dreams were haunted by his parents, childhood horrors, anxiety, and everything bad. Sleeping no longer meant resting comfortably, with no more solace in body or mind. Baeksogo realized how terribly insane that boy was. His actions were extremely reckless, and even if he managed to reach a high level at his age, he would suffer terrible consequences. As she argued with him, the young man tried to say something. With a sad expression, he claimed he had no talent whatsoever. His growth was slower than expected, disproportionate to the number of restrictions he carried. The disarming between talent and skills made Baeksogo wonder what kind of guy he really was. Lee Sungmin had a goal that was hard to reach with his talent. Therefore, it was through Flam that he realized what had to be done. To stand beside people with talents beyond common sense, he too would have to do something extraordinary. At that moment, the woman understood the young man's motivations. The two remained silent, exchanging no words. With a smile on her face, she realized that the young man's goal was grand. Baeksogo also wanted to become the strongest person in the world, understanding his feelings. Confused, the boy paid attention. In the past, he had asked her to teach him movement techniques. Even though she said it was just a joke, the woman was determined to teach him. Handing over a book, she showed that it was the secret manual called Shadowless Soul Flight. The martial art was both a movement and a mystical art, and the book contained everything she had learned about locomotion techniques. Turning its pages, the boy realized how incredible it was. Even without knowing why she was passing on her precious teachings, she understood that he wouldn't give up on his goals. From now on, he was to call her senior sister. With a sweet look, the woman revealed she felt sympathy for the young man and cared about him. Moreover, she always considered herself a kind person who helped others. The protagonist trained his skills again, always keeping in mind the affection of Weiji Hoyin. He alternated his stances between the supreme spear of the 9 heavens and the soul pursuit. By the 5th stance, he was already using the deadly lightning. In his mind, he visualized the destruction he would inflict upon his own body while facing Hoyin. After more than 10 years of training, he still wasn't able to defeat the little celestial demon. In the end, Hoyin stated that teaching martial arts to him had been a mistake, having lost all hope. Using her powers, she decided to take back everything she had given him. After destroying his danshin, the young man would no longer be able to use martial arts from that point on, leaving him completely with nothing. As she walked away, Sungmin tried to call out desperately to his friend. Every step was a rupture with his body's limits, which left him increasingly terrified. Lee Sungmin woke up in shock after a nightmare involving Weiji Hoyan. His body was sweaty, his heart racing, but he soon realized it had just been a dream. Feeling a momentary relief, he tried to control the nervousness that was reflected in his hands. Suddenly, he was surprised by the presence of the mysterious girl who seemed to know more than she should. Startled, he stared attentively at Scarlet, who had been watching him closely during his sleep. The woman commented on his recent actions, especially the addition of new prohibitions. Her proximity made him uncomfortable, and the stench she carried seemed to affect even his eyes. With sarcastic remarks about his choice of restrictions, like the prohibition of dreams and heat, she claimed he would die. The protagonist was already feeling sick from that horrible smell when Dokbi-jun appeared. They were both there for a reason. To help him confuse, the hero didn't seem to understand why the two of them had suddenly appeared. Scarlet repeated that they had come to help Lee Sungmin. They had been sent by the mute woman and brought magical means with them. Upon noticing that Baeksogo was planning something, the boy understood everything. Scarlet had prepared magical scrolls with which he could learn spells. By possessing the scrolls, everything could become more convenient in the world of magic. The landscape reflected a glowing lilac from the sky. Dokbi-jun offered more physical and direct help to deal with the suffering caused by the prohibitions. Determined, the young man was willing to do the best he could. At that moment, the two were preparing for battle. Scarlet taught 4 types of magical techniques. The first was mental cleansing. It was used to purify his mind, which was contaminated by nightmares. The second technique was a simple magic that could strengthen him faster. It was extremely useful in maintaining the prohibition of weight. By the end of the day, the sky took on a more orange hue with few clouds. While fighting Dokbi-jun, he used the third magic to restore fatigue. A magic to recover from fatigue, but excessive use would drain his life force, possibly fatally. However, if he wanted to endure that hellish training, he had no other choice. Even with all the preparation, his performance in combat against an old blind man was still weak. Even without being able to last a mere 100 seconds, some men claimed he would do better next time. Suddenly, the prohibition of heat began to reverberate throughout his entire body. Dokbi held as much as he could, pressing specific points on his body to make him more resistant to the cold. Shortly after, the boy already began to feel a little better. The sword Phantom pressed blood vessels that boosted metabolism so he could withstand the prohibition. After helping the boy, the old man calmly walked away. He left saying it was extremely difficult to find a sparring partner on that mountain. Lee Sungmin showed gratitude and realized that without all that help, he would have died a long time ago. Since his regression, the people around him had become warmer and more helpful. Reflecting on it, he realized that attitude was very strange. To him, it wasn't something natural for human beings. Ever since he returned, everyone was much friendlier to him, not matching his memories of the past. As he walked, Scarlet called out to the old man, who noticed her unpleasant smell from afar. Annoyed, the woman hated being treated that way just because she hadn't bathed in a few days. The two talk about the boy, Lee Sung-min, and how they were helping him. For an old man who only cared about martial arts, he was taking care of the boy with all his heart. But the help wasn't coming only from him, since Scarlet and also personally made magical scrolls. Reflecting on it, neither of them understood why they were helping the protagonist. They only knew that when they saw him, they couldn't leave him alone. While reflecting on the help from those around him, some had decided to set those thoughts aside. To him, in this new life, he was just a lucky boy. Half a year later, the landscape was still filled with purple moss. A warrior held his weapon with all his strength. In the middle of the forest, he continued practicing his skills. Alone and in the middle of nowhere, his expression was pure exhaustion. Even so, he would not give up. Beside him, another character called him a larva. Impressed, he said he didn't believe he would last this long. The warrior remained kneeling in the same place. Without saying anything, he had ignored that person since the day they met. One possibility was that he had taken the prohibition of voice, reaching the half-year mark, and had been added for convenience. Without stopping to talk for a second, the character said he thought he would choose only more complicated prohibitions. Suddenly, the warrior lowered his weapon to the ground. Curiously, the boy watched intently. He was completely different from the person he had been 6 months ago. His evasion, stability, and movements were entirely clean. The movement techniques he learned from Baeksogo harmonized very well with the protagonist. Thinking it over, he believed that even a larva could achieve something if it crawled enough. Laughing, he said that would be the only thing he could do after taking on 5 prohibitions. Not paying attention to a single word, the protagonist kept training. Intrigued, the character watched again with his large eyes. Finally, he grabbed his combat instrument. Determined, he asked again why he was being ignored, since he could understand his body language. Tired, the boy wondered if his companion had nothing better to do. Scared, he knew he couldn't be underestimated. But he would be unable to kill him, according to the rule against violence. Despite everything, his companion struck him. Falling to the ground, the warrior didn't even notice the attack. Laughing at the situation, the other realized how pathetic it was, since he was crawling on the ground like a larva. He had been able to cause a kind of damage indirectly. Showing his sword, he stated that the boy wasn't capable of doing things like that. That weapon in his hand was a key sword. He provoked him, saying he would never be able to have such abilities. Therefore, he would have to work hard to get where he wanted, while the other character could get there easily. Even with so many obstacles, the protagonist would continue his mission, which left the other very shocked. To him, there was no end to the despair if he kept insisting he wasn't talented. In the other's view, his hard work was probably useless, but he could fight in a different way. No matter how long it took, he would continue fighting slowly like a larva. Therefore, the other could remain arrogant, since one day he would drive his spear into that confident body. While demonstrating his abilities, the boy remained quiet in his place. With more force, he planted the spear into the tree. He paid attention to everything the protagonist tried to explain, even without words. In front of him, he looked quite imposing. In the end, he simply said that if he truly believed that, he would be waiting anxiously for the day to come. The protagonist would not give up or cry halfway through. 1 month later, Lee Selman became a 1-year practitioner on the mountain, and it was time to choose a new prohibition. His choice was the prohibition of hearing. The prohibition of hearing was something torturous. His ears were filled with terrible noises he couldn't get used to. 6 prohibitions, despite being on the verge of death every day, he continued swinging his spear without fail. With his movements, he could dodge, stay firm, and pierce with ease. His skills were the supreme spear of the 9 heavens, the mystic arts of Violet Dawn, and shadowless soulflight. Besides that, the fights with Dokbi Jun and the training with Baeksogo helped him on this path. Only Scarlet didn't help much. The stronger Lee Sung-min became, the heavier his body grew, the taste of food became more disgusting, and his dreams more intense. Even greater chills wrapped his body, and there were endless sounds in his ears. However, at times, it was even comforting, because it blocked Flam's annoying chatter when he came looking for him, and so, slowly like a larva, the protagonist continued improving. Upon meeting Mercy, he wanted to know why she had summoned him, since there were still a few weeks left before adding another prohibition. Yes, she turned to the practitioner and congratulated him for overcoming his test.